Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me. I am Andrea Zotinka, Circular Healthcare Project Officer at Healthcare Without Harm Europe. And today I will be talking about our latest publication, Measuring and Reducing Plastics in the Healthcare Sector, and also about our work that has led to it. So this is the result of a project called Towards Plastic-Free Healthcare in Europe, in which we have been collaborating with healthcare organizations to do plastic waste audits, procurement surveys, and research on plastic and solutions. You can find out more about the project by following the link in the slides if you want. The publication itself is divided into two parts. Firstly, there is a theoretical one on plastics in general and on the most common plastic items in healthcare. And then the second part is a bit more practical, as it provides the waste audit methodology that we have used, and also case studies and best practices to reduce plastics while applying the waste hierarchy. The publication will be translated into Spanish and Portuguese soon, so we really hope that it will be useful for audiences in Latin America as well. Now, before we jump into the details of the publication, I would like to first take a look at what we mean with the waste hierarchy. So it is quite straightforward. It is basically just a guide to help us prioritize the most efficient actions to reduce our waste problems. And of course, the best way, and maybe the most obvious way, is to prevent waste and the use of materials altogether. And this can be done through reducing unnecessary use of plastics and also through reusing, repairing, and reprocessing. And these are the kind of solutions that we tried to promote the most in the publication. The bottom half of the hierarchy refers to when a product has already become waste. And we know that currently there is a lot of focus in the world on recycling as a solution. But there are many concerns about it. And I will get to that too pretty soon. But the idea is that prevention is still the preferred option. As for the impact of plastics, well, I'm sure that by now its end-of-life impact on the environment is quite obvious to most people. But perhaps what is a bit less obvious is its connection to the climate crisis, and that most plastic comes from fossil fuels, especially from gas. And in fact, a lot of it is obtained through fracking, which has terrible environmental consequences. Also, the truth is that most plastic is not recycled, and it usually ends up being landfilled or incinerated with drastic negative effects on our climate. And the problem is only getting worse, with production being projected to triple in the next 40 years. So really, if you think that now we have a plastic problem, imagine how it will be by then if we do not address the problem as soon as possible. Plastic also has significant negative effects on human health. So harmful chemicals in plastics are a big source of concern, especially when it comes to vulnerable populations, such as infants and children. So from this point of view, addressing plastics is very relevant to healthcare, considering its healing mission. And we actually have a chapter dedicated only to the harmful chemicals in medical plastics. Now, coming back to the waste problem. So why cannot recycling solve it? Well, the problem is with the scale at which we are producing plastic now. We are simply making too much of it. And the truth is that since the 90s, recycling has been promoted by the industry as the best solution to address plastic. while they conveniently kept selling more and more of it on the side. However, now we see that only around 10% of all the plastic ever made has been recycled. So if recycling cannot deal with the amount of plastic that we have now, despite all the investments and promotion and hype that it is getting, how can we expect it to deal with the triple amount that we might have in 40 years? So the problem is that too much of it is being produced, and we should first address this before considering recycling for the necessary plastic items that will be left then. There is also a big problem with waste exports, especially here in Europe, but not only, because a lot of the waste that is meant for recycling is being sent to countries in the global south that do not have the capacity to deal with it. So it often ends up being landfilled or incinerated and harming the local communities. So now that we have a bit of the basics of plastics and their impact, we can move to our overview of plastics in healthcare specifically. So during the project, through procurement surveys, waste audits, and desk research, we managed to obtain a bit of an overview of some key plastic items that are most commonly used in healthcare. And we believe that if these items are addressed, already healthcare's plastic problem would be reduced quite significantly. So to give you an example, for one project participant, only 6 product categories accounted for more than 60% of their total plastic flow. So in their case, disposable gloves alone represented almost 18% of their plastic use. Then IV solution bags were at around 11.5%, and disposable protective clothing at almost 10%. The other categories were syringes, incontinence items, and IV administration systems. And the survey results of the other participants reflected very similar categories. In this slide, there are some of the results of the waste audit. This particular table is actually not in the publication, but I wanted to show it to you nonetheless. And as you can see, in all the cases, gloves represented more than 10% of the waste found. You can also check the link below for more information about the waste audit results. So overall, doing the waste audits was a very useful exercise for the participating hospitals, as the data can be used then to create targeted action for plastic reduction. And it is also a way to raise awareness in the facility, because the staff helping out can see with their own eyes what the plastic waste looks like, and it can be really eye-opening. Here you can see some photos of the items found during the waste audits. Actually, all the photos in the slides are from the waste audits, and you can see that the items are quite varied. We have also found a lot of non-medical plastics, which we believe would be quite easier to address, especially when it comes to food contact materials, so items that are used in food services. So these are items that could potentially be reusable and which could also save up on costs quite a bit in many of the cases. And we do have a few examples of hospitals that have successfully done so. The second part of the publication focuses more on action and on applying the waste hierarchy. So here we explain, first of all, the waste audit step by step. Now, I won't get into the details here, but you can find everything in the publication. We have also published the waste collection data tool that we have used during the project. So really any hospital in the world that wants to do their own waste audits can use these resources to do it. And to mention that the audit tool and the methodology are both based on the great and exemplary work that was done by Healthcare Without Harm Asia just before us. Here are just a few photos of the way that waste was separated into categories during the audits. This is just to give you an idea of it. So, okay, after the waste methodology and finding out what plastic items are used the most in your facility, it is now time for action. So here we give tips on applying the waste hierarchy, on what each step in the hierarchy means, and also case studies with best practices and ideas on what to do. The first priority should be, wherever possible, to refuse and reduce unnecessary plastic use. And we were quite surprised actually to find out that quite a lot of plastic items in healthcare are being thrown away without even being used, which is really a complete waste of resources. And this is, for example, the case for custom packs. So these are packs containing items used in specific procedures. But in many cases, not all the items are needed systematically, or maybe sometimes some of the items might not be needed at all. And the problem is that when a pack is open, everything is thrown away. Even if it was not used, it is still thrown away. So here we recommend a close monitoring of the procedures and of what items are needed, and also close collaboration with suppliers so that you can adapt the custom packs accordingly. And perhaps items that are not always needed could be made available separately and opened only when necessary, as an example. Another situation we have come across is that of gloves and wipes being thrown away without being used. So this was happening because when taken out of the packaging, a lot of them would fall on the ground, or in the case of wipes, they could be too dry to use, so more would be needed. And actually, a study from Sweden has shown that 6% of their gloves were being wasted due to them falling on the ground, which is really a waste of Earth's resources, but also of money. So what we recommend here is, again, collaboration with suppliers to improve packaging in this example and ensure that only the items that are needed are taken out of the packaging. And I also really wanted to highlight this one case study from our publication, as I think it has a lot of potential to reduce unnecessary plastic use. So as you could see, gloves represent a significant amount of plastic waste in healthcare. And the problem is that they are often overused, with staff sometimes ignoring good hand hygiene practices and perhaps choosing gloves instead. And this can actually increase the risk of contamination. So a hospital in the UK called Great Ormond Street, it's a children's hospital, did a great campaign on educating staff on when gloves are needed and when not, and also on good hand hygiene practices. And the results were really quite amazing. So the annual use of gloves was reduced by 4.3 million. Then waste was also reduced annually by 21 tons. And they had, after just 1 year, financial savings of approximately 119,000 euro. So there was no increase in cross-contamination, and there was also a decrease in hand dermatitis among staff. And moreover, this was a children's hospital, and children were also feeling more at ease, not seeing all the time people wearing gloves. So this is really a great example of how unnecessary use of resources can be prevented, and how it can also save a lot on costs. Now, moving to the next items on the waste hierarchy, reusing, repairing, and reprocessing. So we believe that there are many opportunities for more reusable items in healthcare, alternatives that already exist, so no need to reinvent the wheel here. And this would be beneficial not only from an environmental point of view, but it can also increase the resilience of our healthcare systems. As we have all seen the supply chain shortages that we had at the beginning of the pandemic, for example. In fact, many hospitals had to switch to, for example, reusable gowns instead of disposables, because the disposables were not available anymore. And this actually turned out good for them and for the environment, because it proved to be more cost-effective, and staff even preferred it in some cases. So we have a case study just about this in the publication, and the hospital achieved some cost savings of between 30 to 67%, depending on the type of gown, but they are really quite significant. And in general, we think that there is a lot of potential for reuse in the case of textiles in healthcare. And in the publication, we also talk a bit about the misconceptions regarding reuse and single use, and how reusable items do not necessarily mean an increase of risks. Now, reprocessing is another way of reusing items in healthcare, again, usually leading to significant cost reduction on top of environmental benefits. Now, with regards to recycling. So, as you might have noticed, it is not necessarily our favorite option, but we do know that some healthcare items will remain single-use, because perhaps the risk of infection is too high in those cases to have reusable alternatives. And in this case, it would be great if they could be at least recycled. And here, however, before considering recycling as an option, it is very, very important to ensure that, first of all, local waste collection providers accept the plastic recycling waste streams and the plastic types that you are planning to send to recycling, that the plastics do not contain any hazardous chemicals, as these hazardous chemicals can end up afterwards in the recycled product. You need to ensure that there is demand for the recycled material, because at the moment, virgin materials for plastics are cheaper, and it is more economical to make a product from virgin materials than from recycled items. Then it needs to be ensured that the waste is properly segregated on site, and also that the plastic waste is recycled domestically, in light of what I said about the waste shipments, or at least that there is a lot of transparency in the process. So this was a very brief overview of some of the practical solutions that we proposed. The publication also contains some tips on raising awareness, both within the healthcare facilities and also within the wider communities. So in this slide, for example, on the left, we can see some communication materials from a campaign that was done in Sweden to encourage staff to use reusable scrubs instead of single-use ones. And they really try to use the more fun elements in the campaign, saying that those who use reusables are superheroes, and distributing chocolates. So really focusing on the positive and creating a happy environment. And then on the right, it's an example of raising awareness within the community. For example, a hospital in Spain has distributed over 40,000 letters to new parents, providing information on how to store milk and infant food using glass instead of plastic containers, to avoid toxic chemicals from plastics. So this is the end of my presentation here. There are other interesting examples and information in the publication. I just didn't have time to go through everything. And hopefully I also left some mystery so that you are still curious to go through it yourselves. Overall, we really hope that this presentation and the publication give you a few ideas of what action, what plastic action in healthcare could look like, and also make you realize that a lot of possible actions already exist. So as this is a recording, I am not there to answer your questions right now, but please feel free to send me an email or reach out to me on LinkedIn if you would like to ask me anything about the project or about plastics, or if you just want to chat about this. You can also reach out in Spanish as well. So thank you very much for listening, and have a very nice rest of the day. Thank you.